going to pivot to challenging situations or behaviors in the classroom. And so one of the questions on that are, can you give some tips for encouraging class participation other than candy?
Well, my experience, and everybody laughs, when we have teacher meetings and things like that at school, even high school kids like stickers. As silly as that sounds, I think it's just some token of appreciation and acknowledgement that you were there. I've never thought candy was a good avenue to go. I do think, I know with the little ones, I don't know, what do they do with like the little 2 and 3 year olds? Do they do any kind of things like that with your littlest one?
Yeah,
They do,
as far as attendance, yeah.
We did stickers, and sometimes your kids won't want them. They'll say, "No, I don't want one." But I just, like I said, I just think it's a good way to acknowledge that they were there and you appreciated it.
I think it's your approach. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, and I think you have to tie it with your expectations too. If they weren't following the expectations, sometimes not everybody wins. We learn from it and move on. You're not trying to discourage, but you want to reinforce what you want to happen next time.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's not a punishment; it's reward.
Yeah.
So, did we earn it or did we not?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's your approach to the lesson or how you're saying it, because it might just take one student or one child to raise their hand or one child to speak up and volunteer, and then the way that you react to how they have just done that. Thank you so much. You have just helped me lead this class. Thank you so much. And that might trigger a couple of, especially with the younger ones, or some of them may not know how to participate. Like that can be a modeled behavior. We talked about modeling earlier. They may not know to raise their hand, or they may not know that they're allowed to speak out. And we have some kids that are really afraid to speak out in front of other people. And you might show different ways that they can participate. I mean, if I have a couple of really shy students, and I might ask a question, and it might be a yes or no answer, and you can show them to do this right here, or to do this, thumbs up close to you, or thumbs down close to you, and that's participation. They're active and they're engaged in the lesson, but they didn't have to raise their hand for everyone to see. They didn't have to speak for everyone to see. They did something private for just between you and them.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to realize that kids may not always know how to participate in an appropriate way, or may not know different ways that they can participate. Some kids may only think they can talk out when there are so many other avenues that you can introduce to them, and that's also going to depend on you as the teacher. I mean,
Well, and when you've heard of code switching, what's appropriate behavior at a ball game versus sitting in a church versus a wedding versus a classroom. A lot of kids don't understand code switching. So, especially if they haven't been there, if they're a visitor. I've had children come in that were visitors that really had no idea how to behave. And they didn't know. It wasn't that necessarily it was their fault.
Right.
And so I think we have to keep that in mind too. When you have visitors, they don't understand. And I agree with what you're saying, Dylan. Totally.
Well, having activities like that for participation, like what he was saying with the thumbs up, or like the little whiteboards with the dry erase markers, they love doing that, and they get to erase it and they can just hold up their answer. Or I've done before with, they each get a little Play-Doh and they have to create something to represent their answer or something, and it's just something where they can be active, and especially the shy kids or the visitors, and they can still show you that they're paying attention and participating without it having to be the ones that are extremely comfortable being verbal.
Yeah, that's really good. We actually did that at camp this last year with our Bible drill, which worked really well. So we had the teams all line up, and instead of having to give the answer out loud, they wrote it on a board and just showed it to the judge in front. And so not everybody behind them was seeing their answer, and most of the kids didn't even know if they got it right or wrong. So I like that concept.
and that's multiple grade levels. I mean, that's
Yes.
from
Yeah.
All
that's
kids
from
like
4-year-old,
whiteboards.
5-year-olds
They love it.
to high school.
Yeah.
They can draw smiley faces, they can draw squiggly lines, they can write a word or a phrase, depending, and you were talking about what's appropriate for the age earlier. You can shift that tactic.
Yeah, and to me, it's just be encouraging, when they do answer like Dylan talked about, be encouraging, thank them for asking a question, praise that positive behavior. If someone is sitting quietly, if someone is raising their hand, just really emphasize those things, because I don't know, I feel like in life, we're not always going to get something for doing the right thing. Like, you know, you're not
That's
always going to
true, yeah.
get candy. So I think that's an important life lesson too, that we're not giving them something physical, but just the knowledge that
Yeah.
you're doing a great job.
Well, and on the flip side, like encouraging class participation, it also depends on how you react to a wrong answer.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
you don't want to be like,
Shut them down.
where'd that come from?
Yeah.
You know, and then
You
make
should have learned
every,
that last trimester.
Yeah,
Right.
we talked about
Did you
that
not?
last
Did
time.
you not study?
Like,
Yeah.
and then it just makes everybody uncomfortable. And so, especially in a Bible class setting, even more than like school setting, I try to help guide them, you know, to what the right answer. Well, I can see why you think about, you know, what about this? Or,
Right.
you know, can somebody not even always give them help, but just make them not uncomfortable. You don't want to shut them down. Like, nope, that's wrong. Because that'll affect everybody else too.
Yeah, and especially in Bible class.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that's
Environment.
the place where it should be safe.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
You should feel very comfortable expressing your thought and feel loved
Right.
in that
Yes.
environment.
Right.
So you don't want to treat them like that.
Yeah,
You
for
want them to want to be there
Yes.
and want to
Right.
come back. Okay. So here's another question regarding challenging behaviors and situations. Some kids just don't like to read aloud. So if we ask our kids to volunteer to read, are we embarrassing those who don't? What are some thoughts and strategies regarding reading aloud in the classroom?
I've always felt asking for volunteers. I know in my earlier years, I would just one by one, you know, and then everybody's learning which part they've got to read, what verse. So what I do now is I just ask for volunteers, and if that's what they want to do, fine. And if they don't want to, I don't want to embarrass anybody for whatever reason there might be, because then they won't want to come.
Yeah.
And they'll hate it.
And they'll be if they do come,
Come
they're nervous the whole time. They're going to have to read.
They're going to call
Yeah.
on me. They're going to call
Yeah.
on me.
Right.
And I've always felt like just let them choose. I mean, I know when I'm in trainings and things, I don't want to be,
Right.
you know, made to
With
do
our
something.
peers.
Yes,
Yeah.
with our
Yeah.
peers. I mean,
Yeah.
it can be
Sure.
embarrassing or,
Yeah.
you know, unsettling. But I've always felt like just let them do what they feel comfortable doing and move on. You only have them 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And you want it to be as comfortable for everybody as it can be.
Yeah, and effective.
Yes,
effective.
very effective.
You know, the goal of teaching the kids about Christ and about His love, and that's our goal in the classroom. And we want them to feel comfortable, and we want them to walk away with that and feel edified and built up and loved.
Right.
And you know, when we approach it in a way that's not best, then it just kind of defies our whole goal and purpose. And we don't ever want a child to walk away and feel like they don't want to come back.
Right.
We want to make sure they feel secure and loved.
And that's,
Oh.
sorry.
Sorry.
I was going to say, just like back to the icebreakers and things, that's a great thing to start your trimester with, is asking the kids if they're comfortable reading aloud. Get that knowledge from them so that you know going forward who's comfortable with it, who's not. That way you get a better game plan about what
And
to
you
do.
know, we started those cards now
Right.
that the parents are
Yes,
supposed to
yes.
return.
Yes.
And if they
And
have
that has been
anything
helpful.
they know that you need to know about their child, you know, maybe they struggle with reading or they're shy and they don't want to read, those cards should indicate something like that to the
Exactly.
teachers, so they would know not
Yes.
to call on them if they're
Right.
shy.
Well, and sometimes it's okay for the adult to read.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're really wanting them to be, all the kids to be comprehending what is being read from the Bible or whatever,
Yeah.
having an adult read that's fluent and isn't going to be interrupting the other kids trying to process what's being read
Yeah.
aloud, it might be best for you just to read and not have a kid read and kind of stumble, and then kids are focusing on, oh, they said that word wrong, and then they're not paying attention
Right.
to the words you're actually wanting them to pay attention
Yeah.
to. So in a lot of situations, just read it yourself and
Yeah.
have, that way you know that they're hearing it the way you want it to be read.
Yeah, and especially if you have something longer than 2 or 3 verses,
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
because it takes a lot more time for the
Yes,
child to
depending
read.
on the reader. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yes.
they don't have enough knowledge and experience in the text to be able to read it with the right inflection.
Right.
Right.
And so really, sometimes when they read, maybe nobody understands what's
Right.
just
Right.
read.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and sometimes I've even used the Bible app and played their voices
yeah.
out loud. They're, you know, probably trained people who have the
good
voice to do it. So sometimes it's a longer passage and there's just like no other way for me to say it better than what is in the scripture. I'll do the Bible app with the voice for the kids to listen.
Yeah. Have any of y'all used the Bible Project in your classroom?
Yes.
For the videos?
Yes.
Those are excellent.
Love
Yeah.
those for the, definitely
For the
other
older
grades.
kids.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. They've got some really good videos to utilize in the class. Okay. Let's see. Our last question of the night. Some children, by nature, move around more than others. What are some good ideas to allow for this as needed, but also ensure they are not distracting the other children?
We had talked about, for those that are movers, some type of a fidget. We had talked about that and what is appropriate, that it doesn't become something that's distracting to them. But a lot of times, and we all know this, I can sit here and hold this pen and do whatever, and I still know what you're saying. I don't have to, and I think that's a misconception, that I have to be looking at you for me to be understanding what you're saying. So I feel like, and I think that's something we had discussed about getting some type of fidget for some students, or they bring their own. That's appropriate, something that's
Right.
not going to make a lot of noise or it be, used wrong.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how I've always felt. And then, like I said, moving, going from area to area, when you have those kids, and even give them a job. If they need the job to go get something, hey, I need your help. Can you go over there and get that?
Put the number on the door.
Yes,
you know,
anything
some-
that you can think of. Can you go over there and resort those books for me real quick? And if they need a little time, let them go over.
Yeah.
Don't make a big deal about it. You see it's coming, that there's going to be a moment that's
Yeah.
not going to go well. Let them have some time alone. Let them, you keep them in the classroom. And I have done this when I see students that are really struggling, even with church, I have taken them and walked them down the hall. Because you've got the 3 adults in there, you're able to do that.
Yeah.
Of course, you just know it if some students are runners. I mean, they just are.
Yeah.
So you hold their hand and you walk. And so they just need it. Sometimes they just need a break from the room
Yeah.
and what's going on. They're overwhelmed and they just need a way.
Yeah, and sometimes those are the kids that don't transition well.
Exactly.
Like if you're going to go from the table
Yes.
to the carpet to a different place to like sing or do something, the child that is like that is not going to transition well from the table to the carpet. And it's going to be a struggle
Yes.
to get them to get up out of their chair. If they've gotten in the chair,
Right.
it was a struggle to maybe get them in the chair, and then it might be a struggle to get them out of the chair to the carpet.
And in
So-
those situations, I would leave the child there. We're not there to, make every
Right.
little rule.
Yeah.
We work for what they need. And sometimes if that's what they need and they're going to be successful doing that, I don't care where they're sitting.
Yeah.
Right.
Or as long as they're not hurting someone else or, themselves or someone else.
And they can listen from the table
Yes,
versus
just like
the
that.
carpet.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and you also know, that there are times in which there are you have kids that are in there that just want to be at the table because that's where they want to be.
exactly.
And now in that situation, that's when I would say, no, you're going to come and sit right
Right.
here. But then that goes back to what Molly was saying about getting to know your students or your children and knowing what they can handle versus what they can't. And don't you guys think that it's so important to not make large deals out of small things?
Yes.
For example, I've seen where expectations are that every single kid has to be in the seat while they're at the table. Now, if you have a group of 10 kids at a table or 7 kids at a table and one kid is standing up but they're still at their seat, and no one is distracted by it, everyone's still, the lesson is continuing the way it needs to, you don't have to stop and say, Molly, sit down. You can just continue. Be aware of what's going on. That's really, really important, because that right there, you have made a larger deal than what it needed to be.
Yeah.
And that student at age 4 or 5 may not have even realized he was standing up or she was standing up. And in probably a few seconds or a few more minutes, he or she would probably just sit right back down again
Right.
without you even having to address it. So it's important to also not focus on those really small.
Yeah, you have to weigh, like, are they listening? Is it, just how they're sitting? Like, what is more important in this moment? If they're
Right.
listening and they're not distracting others, then how they're sitting will be okay.
And you've got to remember too, in the school setting, they're probably allowed to stand. So they're thinking, I'm in a class setting, so I can stand. Because that's one of the first things we allow. in the
Yeah.
school is they just need to stand.
Right.
Sometimes we need to stand.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you all brought that up because I think it's really important. We've talked a lot about structure, and that is important. It's
Yes.
important to have structure in the classroom, but it's also important to be flexible
Mm-hmm.
and understand that not everybody is going to do things exactly the same.
Right.
And so we need to make allowances for different needs that are in the classroom and be flexible as a teacher. And it may not be the exact thing that we desire to happen, but sometimes we have to maybe change our desires to meet the needs of the students.
Exactly.
So, well, I think that's all we have tonight. Do you guys have any other things, little tidbits of wisdom you want to add, or anything else you'd want to mention to anyone?
Really good.
No, I mean, I do want to emphasize that things are not going to go according to plan always.
Yeah.
So as a teacher, just don't be discouraged, by things that may not have worked out exactly how you had planned for them. You may have worked for 2 weeks on something and it may completely flop. Or you may work for 2 weeks on something and change it 5 minutes before you go in there and it be one of the most successful things that you've done. So I think it's important for us to realize that things aren't going to go exactly according to plan, and it's okay.
Well,
It's
you just
okay.
need to gauge your audience because you may have a totally different group today than you did, or just one child can change the whole dynamics of your room for sure.
I also think that, if you know what your goal is going in, my goal is to love these kids and to show the love of God to these kids and to point them toward Christ. And if you go into the classroom with that being your number one ambition and goal, your class, what you do in class isn't going to matter. It's going to all flow right because you've prayed about it. You've put the kids first, and you want to teach them about Christ, and
And
that's
it changes
the main goal.
it changes your attitude
Yes.
toward your lesson and toward the class. And it
Definitely.
makes the tone good and positive.
Right. You don't get hung up on the minor details.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just going to say, pray about it. Cause the first time I taught, I was anxious. I was nervous. I was like, there's no way I'm going to do, but just praying, your anxious thoughts to God. And then it just is amazing the difference that makes
Yeah.
going into it.
For sure.